Back during the GameCube's launch, Nintendo put out this weird experimental game starring Luigi. It didn't have you hitting blocks or jumping on Goombas, but instead, it was a quiet little game that had Luigi tiptoeing through a haunted mansion, solving puzzles and vacuuming up ghosts as he whittled his way through each room. It wasn't anything like groundbreaking, like the gameplay was kinda repetitive, and the game was extremely short, but even still, it was so jam-packed full of personality that it was hard not to love it. From the haunting zing of the electronic instruments, to the portrait ghosts, each with their own identities, to hearing Luigi's bizarre inner thoughts on everything in the mansion. This was the game that made Luigi who he is now. Overnight, he went from just player 2 to the cowardly ghost hunter that we know and love today. It would be more than 10 years later that Nintendo would finally surprise us with a long-awaited sequel to the cult classic. This time, a portable game for the newly released Nintendo 3DS. I remember back when it was first announced, nobody really batted much an eye at it. I mean, like, Luigi's Mansion wasn't exactly something that a lot of people were begging for a sequel to, but even still, I was really happy to see it finally make a comeback. I had the game back when it was new, but I never actually finished it. I remember getting to the third mansion before dropping it, and I don't really remember why. Maybe I thought it was boring? Either way, I do remember selling the game because I clearly didn't care about it that much. This is the Nintendo Selects reprint that I bought just for this review because I didn't even have the game anymore. But yeah, I don't know, whatever it was about that original game that I loved so much, it clearly wasn't here. So I'm really interested in finally replaying this game and seeing it through to the end this time and figuring out what it was about this game that just didn't grab me back then. Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon, also known as Luigi's Mansion 2 overseas. I always thought it was kind of weird how sometimes the European titles would be different, like remember Yoshi's Topsy-Turvy, right? Well, if you're from the UK, you don't remember Yoshi's Topsy-Turvy, no, you remember Yoshi's Universal Gravitation. Why would you call it that? No, like if anyone actually knows why they called it that, I would love to know, please tell me. Instead of being handled in-house like the original game, Dark Moon was handed to Next Level Games, a Canadian studio that you might know for the Mario Strikers games and that extremely good Punch-Out reboot. They've already had a strong track record for handling Nintendo properties before, so Luigi's Mansion landing in their hands seemed like a logical decision. Oh yeah, and they also made Federation Force. I hear that game's actually, like, fine. Like, I'm sure it's not really that bad. If they just announced it alongside Samus Returns, it would have not had that gigantic, ridiculous reaction to it that it did. But either way, why don't we pop this game in and give it a try. And then I put it in my actual capture card, because my capture card's a 2DS and not a 3DS, but it just looks nicer when you put it in the 3D. Dark Moon's story begins with Professor Egad doing his typical sciencey stuff with all of his little ghost friends. See, there's this crystal that hangs above Evershade Valley called the Dark Moon. This radiates a pacifying energy which keeps the ghosts all nice and friendly. Seeing this as a chance to study the ghosts in a non-hostile environment, Egad takes his research to Evershade Valley. This gets out of control though when King Boo escapes from his painting and shatters the Dark Moon, causing all of the ghosts to lash out and start ruining everything. So of course, Egad enlists the help of Luigi once again to catch all of the ghosts, find and repair the Dark Moon, and to stop King Boo. The game sports a pretty different structure than before. Instead of having one big mansion to explore, split into 4 chapters, with each chapter having Luigi cover a brand new section of the mansion, there's now 5 smaller buildings to explore instead, each one with a mission-based level structure. This was obviously a change to better fit the handheld nature of the 3DS, which makes sense. The name of the game is still the same. You'll explore each room, looking for things to interact with, puzzles to solve, and ghosts to capture. Though this time, instead of having the one consistent goal of saving your brother, this time you've got a different objective for every mission. This could be rescuing a toad, maybe collecting a number of a certain thing, or simply making your way to a specific part of the mansion. The gameplay has seen a considerable amount of changes. Since the 3DS lacks a second stick, aiming the poltergust is now done with the face buttons, X for up and B for down, but obviously you're not going to get that degree of control that you did with the stick, so to compensate, the vacuum's radius has been made much more forgiving and the level design always keeps the limited angles in mind. Instead of simply shining your flashlight at a ghost to stun them, you'll now use the new flash move. Holding down the A button will charge up your flashlight and releasing it will unleash a blinding flash. This will stop enemy ghosts dead in their tracks so you can give them the suck. The tug of war feels considerably different in this game. The first one had you slamming the sticks away from the ghosts again and again, and paired with the dings and pings of the draining health, it just felt awesome to vacuum up ghosts, but the 3DS doesn't have sticks, it's just got a measly circle pad, so they're gonna unfortunately have to tone that down a bit. You'll now vacuum up ghosts by simply holding the direction away from it. Doing this will slowly charge up a meter, having you press the A button for a powerful burst that'll take a large chunk of health away. Once it ticks all the way down to 0, the ghost is yours. It's fundamentally the same mechanic, but it feels much different in execution. I do like how they handled it though. The tug of war doesn't quite have that satisfying punch anymore, but I think the flash and charge bursts kinda make up for it. Charging up that thing and blasting it at a bunch of ghosts at once just feels really good. We also got a new dodge move that's handy for maneuvering around enemy attacks without breaking your grip on a ghost, but at the expense of sacrificing your charge meter, so you might find yourself risking getting hit just to use that burst instead. Also new, we've got the Dark Light, a new type of flashlight that can unveil invisible objects. This could be a door, something you'll need to interact with to solve a puzzle, or simply something you can walk on like a bridge. I really like this. It gives you yet another way you can explore your environment. Usually it's pretty obvious where you'll need to use it. There'll be a big shadow on the ground indicating it, or sometimes it'll be a large empty space that, obviously hides something. But there's a lot of side things that are totally optional that you can use it on as well. Just like the original game, there's tons of cache hidden in nooks and crannies all around, but while in the original game you would mostly approach things and shake or knock on them, you don't really do that much in this one. You can check select objects like furniture and whatnot with the X button. Approaching it, you'll get a button prompt, but since you can't interact with everything at your own pace without the game telling you which specific things are the ones you'll have to click on, the game doesn't have that same sense of every object being significant and worth checking. Objects like drawers don't even stay open once you've checked them, making them feel even less significant. You can't tell what you've already rummaged through at a glance, and that just further discouraged me from bothering to do that in the first place. And while that did feel like a bummer at first, I think the alternative they offer here is actually quite a bit better. I mean, it was fun poking around the room looking for every last little thing, but in Dark Moon, instead of doing that, you'll find yourself using your gear to find these secrets instead. I'm talking invisible objects, fake walls made of cloth, and even some really complex stuff like hidden rotors and objects hung on the wall that'll slide away a panel. The secrets in Dark Moon are less about rummaging through drawers and dressers, and more about using your equipment to interact with your surroundings in practical ways. It's all about mechanisms and trickery, and I actually think this is a much more fun way to handle it. And with the new gear comes a much bigger focus on puzzle solving as well. You'll use the vacuum in a lot of different creative ways, clinging onto handles, pulling cords, picking up and launching objects, even inflating balloons and using them to float. There's a much better variety in how you interact with the puzzles this time, and there's a lot of genuinely cool stuff to figure out here. They made better use of the toads this time too. Instead of sitting around and crying and letting you save your game, you can now launch them around and get them to do simple actions, Pikmin style. There's a better incentive to actually look for all of that cash this time as well. In the first game, your total was added up at the end and then you simply got a letter grade for it, but this time, all your money will be put towards upgrades for your Poltergust and your Dark Light. Each Poltergust upgrade is going to give you a new level of charge for sucking up those ghosts, and every Dark Light upgrade will increase the duration of which you can use it for. This gave me a much better reason to actually look for all of this stuff. I mean, I'm a kleptomaniac when it comes to collectibles and games, so I'm gonna snipe it all anyway, but the payoff for actually doing that felt a lot better to me in this game. Boo hunting makes a return. They've even got those boo names again, which is pretty great. I remember this one being pretty infamous back when the game was new. I'll save you the trouble. It just spells out boo. Yeah, that's it. Oh, here we've got Boo-teen. Oh, I get it. It's like poutine. Haha. Well, I guess that's one way you can tell the studio was Canadian. Like me! The hunt for these little dudes is quite a bit different than before. Instead of having 50 out in the wild using your radar to track them all down, this time there's only one in each mission. They'll be found hiding in an invisible object somewhere throughout the mission. It isn't mandatory this time. You won't need a certain amount to progress like before. Instead, they're simply there as an optional thing. You'll just unlock a bonus mission if you can find every boo in a mansion. These are just time attack missions that have you trying to get all the ghosts in a mansion as fast as possible. It's a decent distraction, I guess, but it's not really much a reward if you ask me. The process for actually catching the boo is quite different as well. You'll use your Dark Light to solidify it into the visible plane, and then you'll grab his tongue with a vacuum cleaner and let it rip like a Beyblade. The animation for sucking the dude up is pretty good too.
Oh yeah.
How did he do this? It does not work. It does not work. Like the first game, there's a healthy variety in ghost types. You've got the standard dudes, the brawny dudes, the ones that'll hide in furniture, these jerks that'll scare you and make you lose your grip on whatever you had charged up. There's the goo ghosts that'll split into smaller goo ghosts, these big guys that'll spit slime at you as you shave down their huge amount of health, and lastly, the big brain boys that'll serve as a sort of mini-boss. The ghost types are kinda lacking in comparison to the previous game. While there's 7 core types here, the previous game had a little bit more than that. Though, to its credit, the basic green ghosts do come with a lot of different quirks, each one requiring a different strategy. Some of them wear sunglasses, making them immune to your flash until you rip them off their face. Some will have welding masks, having you wait for the opportune moment when they lift it up to use a flash. We've got guys with swords and shields, ones wrapped up like mummies, some with shovels. There's a bunch of different types of them. And I kinda like this. It employs you to use a variety of strategies with every battle, and it helps keep the game from feeling as repetitive as the first one. But even still, there's something about these new ghosts that just doesn't feel the same. Maybe it's their rounder designs? I don't know, it's kinda hard to put my finger on it, but I think a big part of why I don't care for the ghosts in this game as much is because of their personalities. The ghosts in the first game were bulky and bumbling, they had low-pitched cries. It really felt like something sinister, but here they tried really hard to give them more comedic personalities. They're slimmer, quicker, and they've got high-pitched voices. They're a lot more childish this time, taunting you with juvenile quips like... And to its merit, the ghosts this time, I think, do have more personality. You can tell they really tried hard to make the standard enemies more entertaining, and to an extent, yeah, I would agree, I think they achieved what they were going for. But I think the reason I just wasn't feeling this game's personality is because of the lack of variety in it. Yeah, these ghosts do have more personality, but it's the same personality again and again and again. So you gotta ask yourself, what is it that's missing here? And well, I think the answer is pretty obvious, and I think a lot of people are going to agree with me. It's the lack of portrait ghosts. Oh my god, they just don't have them in this game, and that's precisely what gave the first one so much to work with. They all felt totally unique, each and every one with their own attitudes, aspirations, motives, thoughts, and feelings. Some were arrogant, some were sympathetic. We had angry ghosts, gluttonous ghosts, lovesick ghosts, ghosts that want to do something, and ghosts that just want to be left alone. The game didn't have to rely on the same one-note sense of humor or silliness. Never did they try to feed you the same thing again and again. And in Dark Moon, that's exactly what they do, and that's a big part of what kills that Luigi's Mansion magic. It's kind of interesting, honestly. I actually think this is a mechanically superior game to the first one. I think the gameplay does a lot of things that make it a better game to play. But then I started to realize it wasn't really the gameplay that made me love Luigi's Mansion to begin with. It was definitely all of the little things, like scanning your environment and hearing Luigi's thoughts on every piece of furniture in the room, reading the biographies of every portrait ghost, and the sound design, man, they just didn't capture any of that in this game. Let's start with one of my favorite tiny details from the first game. The humming. In Luigi's Mansion, Luigi would nervously hum along to the composition, but the thing is, his humming completed the song. It was like using him as an instrument. Without the humming, the song was incomplete. It's just the backup instruments. They did bring this back for Dark Moon, but now the songs are all complete compositions with Luigi just occasionally humming over top of it. He's not completing the song. What was once a brilliant combination of diegetic and non-diegetic sound to form the game's soundtrack is now just normal humming and nothing more. Okay, it does happen sometimes, but only in rooms that just happen to have minimalistic versions of the song you'll hear throughout that mission, and even hearing it then is rare because of how hesitant Luigi is to even hum to begin with. And I think they went way too heavy on the strings this time. There was so much electricity in the original soundtrack, that spooky theremin. it gave the soundtrack that freaky zap that a game about ghosts really needs. But here it's just orchestra and nothing else, and it sounds good, yeah, but it just doesn't deliver that zest, that spice, that zing that the original soundtrack had. The jingle for when you pick up an item. You know, it's a harp, you know, whatever, it just feels like, okay, you did a nice thing, but in the original game, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Even the music and sound effects for when you're catching a ghost, the original had this stutter, this tick to it. Every time you moved the stick, there was musical feedback to match that. Like, that was the sound of catching a ghost, but that's been replaced with this whirly-dirly orchestra. Like, it just doesn't have that same impact, man. And I know everyone's gonna be rushing to the comments to tell me about that sick ringtone, but like, yeah, it is a rad song, but the amount of times you have to hear it, it gets old pretty quickly. EGAD calls you like every 2 seconds in this game, and that's kind of a fault of the mission-based structure. They want you going back to the lab every 10 to 25 minutes, and yeah, I get that, you know, short bursts good for portability, but the fact that this thing had to be on a portable console gave it these rules that I think ultimately makes the pace a little bit shaky. Since you gotta go back and forth so many times, you'll be going through the same rooms a bunch of times, and that would be fine in the first game, but since Dark Moon has a bigger focus on puzzle solving and mechanisms, you'll find yourself performing the same actions to get through that room time and time again. The missions themselves also repeat a number of times. It seems at least one mission in every single mansion is like, okay, go to this room. Oh no, just kidding, the ghost stole all of the thing you need to get in there, so go through all of these rooms again and find all of the things. Every single mansion is gonna have you doing a bunch of backtracking to do a collect-a-thon mission, and like, it's not that bad in its execution, it's just the fact that you have to do this every single time, you know? Every mansion also has a polterpup mission, having you track down this ghost dog, and I actually really like these ones. Using the dark light to trace his paw prints up the walls and through the ceilings, it's pretty cool. Until you have to go through this same room again. I just did this, come on. It's funny because the final mansion is not like this at all. Every mission targets a different part of the mansion. The first one you're underground in the catacombs, the second one you're on the first floor, and the third one you're on the second floor. This is much closer to the structure of the original game, and I thought it was really good. It felt much less like padding and more like, you know, game. I loved it. I loved the final level. I thought it was great. Except the final mission where it's like, hey, want to take on 700 ghosts? Wow, and you got to do it all in one life too, which is like really... This was the first time in the game I died. And I also found out that these bones is like, oh, they're extra lives. I actually didn't know that until this final level because this was the first time I died because this is so freaking hard. And my thumb was like bleeding by the end of it from how much I was like yanking that circle pad everywhere. Dear Lord. You know, as many things as there are in this game that I wish were done differently, there is a lot of things here that I do think were handled exceptionally well. The best thing this game offers, in my opinion, is... oh man, I just love this. Okay, so the field of personality is definitely below par here for the ghosts, but Luigi? Oh my god, they nailed Luigi.
Uh-oh. Hello?
You don't get those inner thoughts anymore, which is really disappointing, but in every cutscene, he is just a big dumb idiot, and I love it. He has no idea what he's doing at all times. He doesn't even want to be there.
Yahoo! Oh.
This scene right here, this scene right here. It is just too good. I'm just gonna play it. You guys, everyone, the world needs to see this.
Oh. Hello? 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 It's me. Oh.
They nailed Luigi in this game from his stupid physical mannerisms.
Huh?
To the short lines he has for everything.
Ciao.
This is the further evolution of Luigi's character that I always wanted to see from a new Luigi game, and I think they did a great job. Now, what I don't think they did a good job on was the boss battles. Well, the first one is actually, like, absolutely freaking fantastic. It's one giant environmental puzzle involving figuring out how to get the fire to specific webs, and the aha moments in it are incredibly satisfying. It's like just hard enough to be like, wait, what the heck do I do for a little bit until you see it and you're like, oh my god, that's how it works. And I was really impressed. It was really freaking good. But then after setting the bar so high, the second one is just the typical dodge the attacks, vacuum the obvious weak point, rinse and repeat 3 times. And then the third one is just a gauntlet of enemies. And the fourth one's a turret segment? Come on, what happened here? How did you go from having such a good boss fight to these lame and generic ones? At least the boss fight with Big Boo wasn't too bad. You gotta shrink them all down into a bunch of little boos and launch them into the cages on the train that's circling the arena. It wasn't as good as the first one, but I still thought it was pretty fun. And the final boss, well, spoilers, I guess, you skip here if you don't want to see the final boss or the ending, I guess. I mean, yeah, anyway, yeah. So, King Boo, the fight's okay. I like the fight from the first one better, but it wasn't a terrible final fight. It could have been better, could have been worse. Yeah, that's pretty much all I gotta say about it. The ending is so feel-good, though. Luigi defeats King Boo, rescues Mario, who apparently got kidnapped at the last second. Yeah, I don't know, just roll with it. And then he restores the Dark Moon. Mario congratulates his bro, and they take a group photo. We then end on Luigi with his newly adopted ghost doggy as they relax together. Oh, that's adorable. The end. Well, before I wrap things up, I guess there's also a multiplayer mode that I might as well check out. You and up to 3 friends, I almost said 4. Up to 3 friends will explore a procedurally generated mansion, meeting one of 3 objectives depending on the game mode. This could be getting all the ghosts, finding the exit, or tracking down all of the polterpups. It's okay, I guess. I don't really think they made enough rooms to be generated because you're going to be seeing the same exact ones really frequently. It's kind of fun though, I suppose, but it's definitely not much more than a small distraction from the main game. That was a lot of fun going back to this one. I liked it a lot more than I remembered liking it, and I think a big part of that is because I actually bothered finishing it this time. Back when I first played it, I stopped at the 3rd mansion, and that's actually where things really start to pick up. I've heard a lot of people tell me that their first impression of the game was that it was kinda slow, and I totally understand that. That first mansion is a slog, and the second mansion has fun moments, but it's pretty repetitive with the missions having you tediously go through the same rooms a bunch of different times. But the third mansion, the old Clockworks, that's where the game starts doing some really interesting stuff with the puzzles and whatnot. But as I've explained, it definitely lacks the charm, the zest, the secret sauce that the original game had. It mostly lies within the sound design and the lack of portrait ghosts in my opinion, but the actual gameplay, I think, is, in a handful of ways, a little bit better than the original, at least with the puzzles, not so much the tug of war. I think that feels vastly inferior to the original, but actually going through the rooms, doing the puzzles, I think there's a lot to love here. I think the easy thing to say would be, it's a good game, just not a good Luigi's Mansion game, but even that I don't think is accurate. It is a good Luigi's Mansion game, just not a good Luigi's Mansion experience? If that makes sense. But hey, they just announced Luigi's Mansion 3. Maybe that'll do a better job of capturing that personality. It looks like it'll be taking place in one mansion instead of several, and since it's on console, I don't imagine they'll be using the same mission-based structure that caused some repetition here and there, so I'm looking forward to seeing how it'll pan out. And if you'd like to hear my 2 cents, this is what I'd like to see from Luigi's Mansion 3. This is what I would say would make the best third game possible. So firstly, keep a lot of the new mechanics they introduced in Dark Moon, like the Dark Light and the Flash, while adding even more gadgets on top of that. I think the puzzle solving was one of Dark Moon's strongest suits, so expand on that. But you need to ditch that mission-based structure. Instead of having 5 small mansions split across like 30-something missions, I'd much rather see one big mansion split across maybe 5 chapters, closer to the structure of the original game. Bring back the electricity of the original game's soundtrack, make it less heavy on strings, and throw in some more theremin. I think a wider variety of instruments would benefit the soundtrack well, instead of just having orchestra. Also, keep Luigi's hilarious personality from the cutscenes of Dark Moon, but also combine that with the strange inner thoughts on his surroundings from the first game. I think combining those 2 things would create the ultimate Luigi persona, and I would love to see that. Here's a big one for me, number 5, is you gotta give that tug of war the punch it had in the first game. Have those sound effects, the feedback, the stick movements, I really want to see that. But lastly, and most importantly, and I think this is going to be the one thing that everybody agrees with me on, bring back the portrait ghost. That is where the core of the first game's personality was, and it's a big part of the reason why a lot of people thought the second game was lacking. So, you gotta bring that back. Please, Nintendo, please do it. But however they handle it, here's hoping it'll at least be good. I know I'm definitely looking forward to it, and I'll definitely give it a review when it comes out. So, Here's to then. Goodbye.